create a bit of context around the topic for you quickly. So, I firmly believe that the best way to force yourself to learn about something is to commit to teaching people about something. Do you agree? So last year, Heather and I, our Dean of Teaching and Learning, we took on the daunting task of submitting abstracts to a CHE conference. Now it's daunting because the CHE is our regulator and we can't really embarrass ourselves there because they are the people that give us license to practice. So what I want to share today is a little bit about the lessons learned throughout sort of the research that we had to do up to that point. But then something really sort of enlightening happened to me a couple of weeks before that conference. I was asked to speak at a different conference, sort of a last-minute step-in. It was a conference for SADC universities, so all the big universities were represented, as well as universities from South Africa, so they were chancellors, senior academics. And when they contacted me, I said, I don't really have a topic, but I've got this thing that I've prepared for the CHE, and it's 2 weeks away. Maybe I can test run it at your conference. And they were very happy that I was willing to step in. But I was about 10 minutes into the presentation when someone stuck up their hand and said, is motu a computer term? So I quickly had to change lanes. The topic was about academic integrity in a motu learning environment, and I very stupidly assumed everybody understood what motu was, especially senior academics from all over. But they had no clue, not a single clue. So I then asked, please just put up your hand if you've got some sort of idea, because I just needed to salvage this a little bit, and not a single hand went up. And I had to change direction and just sort of, it turned into an it was akin to sort of an evangelical session, because I had to convert the people to motu at that point, and it turned out very positive, and they later turned into a debate on whether motu, this new thing, is it revolutionary or is it evolutionary, and meanwhile, motu is a fairly old concept, right? But that bothered me. Why, among all of these universities from all across SADC, would there be absolutely no inkling of what motu is, right? And in the preparation for the CHE conference and the further reading, it started to become clear that motu in the literature has all but disappeared. And I want to talk to you a little bit today about what happened to motu, and then ultimately whether motu is still the correct or the most efficient system for knowledge production for South Africa today. Right. Okay, so I haven't been living alongside motu for very long. So I started working at DaVinci February 2018, and my first task was to develop an undergraduate curriculum for our BCom aligned to motu principles. Now, I do what everybody does when they talk about motu here. You just smile and know it's, yeah, of course, motu. So you go home and you Google motu, and my first Google was how to develop an undergraduate curriculum for motu, zip. Guidelines for curriculum development in motu, zip. Assessment in motu, zip. So then I started to worry, right? So my first challenge was that there was no guide, not even vague general guidelines on how to apply motu to undergraduate curriculum design or any curriculum design for that matter. The source texts. So motu, like many other theories, has source text. So that source text is called the new knowledge, and the new production of knowledge. And that source text helped me. There was no help there. So that text, if you read it, it's a bunch of essays written by researchers. There's a group that was convened by a researcher called Gibbons. So often in DaVinci's hallways, you'll hear us talking about Gibbons et al. So that's the primary source text for motu. Is essays of people observing motu within a research environment. So science largely, and how motu was applied. But then I also realized that these source texts were not helpful because they consisted little more of these essays, and they didn't engage with motu as a finite construct. So they didn't talk about motu as a model. So again, that really worried me because there was nothing to guide me. There's nothing to draw from. There weren't even any examples that I could use to copy around motu curriculum design. The primary and secondary text on motu also was outdated. I couldn't find anything really newer than 2010. And apart from that, I started coming across texts about Mode 3. So now I'm new at the DaVinci Institute. We are a motu institution. It seems that Mode 3 is the thing that's going on, and I couldn't find any guidelines on even how to do my job that was in Mode 2, right? So no help for curriculum design at all. All I could work with were the principles as expounded in Gibbons et al., the new production of knowledge. And obviously I got a lot of support from my peers. So Prof. Ben has been very helpful. Dr. Renel Blom has been very helpful. There's been a lot of support on guiding me. But no one could put anything in front of me and say, this is how it looks. And that is part of the essence of Mode 2, right? And we'll get to that point in a minute. So all I had to go on were these principles. Now, these principles relate to research. They don't relate to undergraduate curriculum design. So these principles, and everybody's familiar with these principles, transdisciplinary, so research in a motu environment is transdisciplinary, so it doesn't start within the biology department. It starts with someone identifying a problem and then surrounding them with people and resources from all kinds of disciplines. So it starts there, heterogeneous, in other words, diverse in character, hierarchical as opposed to hierarchical, transient, and utilizing quality control measures that were outside of a traditional or particular discipline. But it starts with a problem. So that flips it around completely. Because as I understood it, research starts within a discipline. And you use the tools and structures and methodologies of that discipline, and that's how you expand the knowledge base of that particular discipline. So that was a little light for me. So Mode 2 is the other way around, right? But still no help on how to apply that to curriculum design. I had to make a concerted effort to develop my understanding and to catch up with those around me that have been living alongside Mode 2 for much longer than I have. So why living alongside Mode 2? Why not living with Mode 2 or in Mode 2? So in my attempts to read as much as possible about Mode 2, I came across an article and I thought this is going to be a shortcut. I'm going to catch up because this article was titled 20 Years of Living Alongside Mode 2 and the New Production of Knowledge. So I started reading this article because firstly I thought it would help me catch up with the people around me. I can get a sort of an overview or a summary of what Mode 2 is about and how it's developed over 20 years. And I could get an understanding of why this strange preposition, why alongside. So the authors didn't directly address the odd word choice in their title, but something started to shift in my understanding of Mode 2. Mode 2 was referred to as a way of producing knowledge. And the implication was, at the time, that it was a trend of producing knowledge. So, similar to a fashion trend, it might be replaced by a new trend, it might fall away, it might come back, it might be replaced when it doesn't get a foothold in the market, but there might also be underlying trends, and as with fashion, there might be perpetually propagated classical trends. A blazer is a classical trend, even though we wear bomber jackets sometimes, right? Which could be used as benchmarks for emerging trends. So this was my first Mode 2 revelation, and there's three, and you need to tell me if you don't keep up. The first was Mode 2 was not a purposely created thing. It's not a thing, right? And that's why there are no guides, and that's why there are no models or examples, because it's not a thing, but rather a naturally occurring phenomena or trend that was observed by onlookers like Gibbons and his team that lived alongside it. So they were observing something naturally occurring, they documented it, they found similarities across the world, and they gave this thing a name, and they called it Mode 2. But if this is a naturally occurring phenomenon, naturally occurring phenomena occur in response to something. So what was it responding to? What was the climate that motu, knowledge production as an activity, was responding to? Now here I need your help. Who remembers 1994? Apart from the politics and all the wonderful things that happened in South African society, what was life like in 1994? So Gibbons et al., that sort of the first publication of this concept, 1994, it was responding to something. What was life in 1994 like? Now, I was in grade 9. I remember some of it, but not all of it. Anybody wants to just give me what happened? What was life like?
We still had Walkmans.
Sorry?
We still had Walkmans.
We still had Walkmans, but there was a shift happening. Remember, 1994 was the beginning, or sort of the end, of the third industrial revolution. It was sort of just the beginning stages of what would become the fourth industrial revolution. We started people having internet connections in their homes, right? People carrying cell phones. You could communicate with people overseas a lot easier. So what they were observing as researchers was that in the research world, what the technology, the climate allowed us, and what the institutions allowed us, in other words, the larger institutional research practice allowed us, there was a disjointedness there. So one researcher described this as, in 1994, cross-pollination, convergence, melding, intersecting, and repositioning of research disciplines, which was brought about by the rapid rise and access to IT and communication technologies that empowered the individual researcher. Now just think of this, how enormously empowering that was. Previously, if I wanted to do research, I go where? A library. Okay, let's talk a bit larger than that. I would have to be associated with what? An institution of higher learning, right? So I had to apply for funding because I need to go and travel and hand out questionnaires. I have to interview people. It was enormously taxing. The technology allowed us to bring all of that home. So a researcher was empowered to conduct a lot of that which had to happen previously on behalf of other institutions by him or herself, right? So Gibbons and his team, what they were really doing is they were observing these changes happening. So a shift from a disciplinary approach to a transdisciplinary approach, which was fueled by this access to new technologies, right? So a little sidebar. Now keep an open mind. This has happened before. So in 1994, the end of the third industrial revolution, we've got all of this technology, all of this possibility, but the institution is still rooted very much in mode 1. So disciplinary, research is conducted by institutions of higher learning. You have to do a PhD to make that. There's a little cartoon that every PhD candidate comes across that shows you what you actually achieve. You start at undergraduate level, and when you grow and you grow and you grow and you grow and you grow inside this bubble. And then when you do your PhD, it's a little pinprick that just shifts that bubble by a micro nanometer outwards. That's what a PhD is, right? That's how we expand knowledge. But all of this had to happen within a discipline. What Motu said was no. This can happen across disciplines. This can happen at home. We are empowered to do so much more that we have to break these bonds of the traditional methodologies. Now, this happened before. This happened at the end of the 19th century, at the end of the second industrial revolution, right? Now, bear with me. So a similar movement started, a movement that was frustrated that knowledge, science was not progressing sufficiently to keep up with the industrial revolution, in other words, the technologies that were emerging around them. And the frustration of being rooted within a discipline. So we can't address the problems of society if it sits outside of our discipline, right? So economist sits here, biologist sits here. So no one starts with the problem. They start within the discipline and grow the discipline. And maybe that discipline and the growing of that discipline starts addressing a societal problem, right? So guess what they did? They went back to a very old practice that comes from the Middle Ages. Have you heard of alchemy? You know what an occultist is? Not Harry Potter. It's got nothing to do with Harry Potter, witches, and strange people. They were applying a principle the occult philosophers of a 19th century was simply saying that we need to find answers for problems, and we need to be open to look for those answers everywhere and anywhere. What it meant was that they were trying to tap into the third realm of knowledge. So the first realm is what we know. The second realm is what we know we don't know. And then the third realm is, and the grammar on this is correct, is what we don't know, right? So they were playing in that space in an attempt to take any science, and this has nothing to do, it's very interesting, and I urge you at some point to go read up about Eliphas Levi and the occult philosophers. I came across a quote by Oscar Wilde that was moving in those circles at that point that said that everybody was an occult philosopher. And what it simply meant was everybody was getting hip to this movement that we need to look outside of our base disciplines, anywhere and everywhere, to find the solutions of the day. Right, okay. But to get back to the problem that we're struggling with now, is whether the climate has changed so significantly from 1994 that Mode 2 no longer represents the most efficient way to produce knowledge today. But we'll come back to that in a moment. Right. So, in an article entitled The Transformation of Knowledge Production and the Academic Community, a researcher called Sousa from Portugal in 2011 provided me with my second revelation. So my first revelation is Mode 2 is not a thing, it wasn't constructed, it was observed as a natural phenomenon. My second revelation is this. Sousa interviewed senior academics, vice-chancellors and representatives from regulatory authorities across Portugal and the UK, and managed to plot developmental milestones in the life of Mode 2. So he did this in 2011. So he had a good sort of view over what was happening, and he was curious to know what has happened to Mode 2, right? We don't talk about Mode 2 at this point anymore, and I'll get to that. But he wanted to understand what was the sort of development that Mode 2 has undergone. So he says that the new production of knowledge, that base text, had a profound impact on the international research community because it promised rapid plateau-shattering progress. As the research community is largely anchored in institutions of higher learning, these institutions had to find ways of transforming their own research and researchers. So what this meant was, researchers sit at the very top of the hierarchy in an institution, right? So to get to that point, to transform our research as an institution and the people that conduct that research, we have to look downwards. We have to look further down the line and see what are the inputs to provide that particular output, right? So the new trend in knowledge production therefore had an effect on how we approach undergraduate studies as well. The approach, when adopted throughout an institution, would soon develop into the identifying characteristics of that institution. So we went from the introduction of Mode 2, the adoption and adaptation of Mode 2, to the development of a Mode 2 approach, and then the adoption of a Mode 2 identity. So DaVinci referred to itself as a Mode 2 institution, as did many other institutions throughout the world. It became an identity. Right? Then what happened? Nothing. Nothing happened. So after that development, over that span of time from 1994 to 2010, institutions going from adopting Mode 2 to becoming Mode 2 institutions, nothing happened after that. Citations of a new production of knowledge increased fivefold between 1994 and 2010, and then dropped to nothing. What happened? How do we account for it? Did the world of 2010 suddenly develop needs that were not present in 1994 and therefore needed a new mode? Or, if we keep it with a fashion trend analogy, did the public simply lose interest? Or, still keeping with this analogy, has the trend matured into a movement that goes by another name? You know, the new romantics wore skinny black pants and wore makeup, but they became the goths, right? If you remember that. Or more likely, has the trend become normative and canonized? In other words, no longer a way or a trend or an identifier to elevate it from the herd, but a practice fully integrated into the prevailing system of knowledge production and dissemination at the time. Now, from what I've learned throughout my short time living alongside motu, I strongly believe that we no longer refer to motu in the scholarly world, but it did successfully penetrate and permeate classical knowledge production systems. And before anybody throws a rock at me or a shoe at me and shouts, but look at how the CHE is treating institutions that align themselves with motu. Look at the confusion, look at the doubt around motu. How can you say that motu permeates classic knowledge systems? Allow me a moment to explain. So I lied to you earlier when I said that motu had no further developmental milestones after becoming an identifying characteristic. Now, it's not really a lie, because some people would argue that a caterpillar becoming a butterfly, the butterfly is the first stage in the life of a butterfly and not the last stage in the life of a caterpillar. So the motu in its form at that time has run its course, right? You see, the thing is, it morphed into a completely different animal, or rather into the spirit of what was once an animal. Sosa claims that after the identity phase, and the reason motu seemingly disappeared after 2010, is that motu was deconstructed and reconstructed into a discourse. Right. And that is where I wanted to leave it for the longest time. I was happy with that in my own development, my own understanding. It's not a thing anymore. It's not a trend. It's not a way. It has disappeared largely because it has been integrated, normalized, and has now become a discourse, right? Something completely intangible, but in existence, right? So a discourse, an ever-evolving discussion between stakeholders in the knowledge production value chain. First, between academic and industry, the world of academia and industry, and that is one of the big moves that motu made possible, and said that what we do has to be relevant to the world of work. It is problem-focused. Then, adding government, adding civil society, and then moving from there. But as a student of language, this bothered me, because motu cannot technically be a discourse in and of itself, right? So I had to come up with my own definition. Are you ready for this? I wasn't given this at the beginning. So this is gold. Are you ready for gold? So I've got a definition of what motu is now. Motu, with its underpinning principles and characteristics, is an organizational framework used to facilitate an ever-evolving discussion on knowledge production initiatives that aims to align with the needs of a particular socio-economic, but also temporal context. Right. How do I know this? How do I know that even though motu has seemingly disappeared, that it's still alive and well, but in a different form? Right. Have you ever heard of oculistry? Have you? What does an oculist do? They manufacture prosthetic eyes. Right. So the development of the training of oculistry, the eye people, right, has traditionally been in an apprentice, a mentor-mentee relationship, right? There was no training. There's no qualification you can do to become a person that measures the eye socket and manufactures an ocular prosthetic, right? South Africa has taken the charge in that, and they've developed the very first ocularist qualification, right? And this qualification, true to motu, does not sit in one institution. It sits across various institutions that are all contributing a bit of it. Now, an ocularist manufactures eyes, so they need to know about materials, they need to know, they've got a lot in common with dental technology, but there's an equal part of psychology in it. So imagine you're a person that has lost their eye, now someone needs to make you an eye. There's a lot of counseling and psychology involved in it, there's a lot of anatomy involved with it, general medical practice. These are largely people that own their own businesses, so practice management, business management, computer literacy, accounting. So it's one of the first disciplines that has fully embraced this transdisciplinary approach to the development of their people, but they're not the only people. Nursing, a far more established discipline, used to sit very firmly in medical practice, Did you know that they sit apart now and why they sit apart? They've made the movement outside the umbrella of medical practice because due to the problem that faces hospitals, they realize that the work of a nurse is as much administrative and operational as it is medical practice, right? Problem first. Accounting, a very mode 1 type discipline, is moving into another discipline, an emerging discipline called business informatics because of the rise of technologies. Chiropractic, another very well-established discipline, has recently regulated their national qualifications, similar to nursing, to incorporate equal parts of psychology, counseling, business practice, computer literacy, and a whole bunch of other things where they were previously firmly rooted in a single discipline. So all of this is evidence that even though we don't talk about motu anymore, the spirit, the philosophy, the discourse of motu is very much alive in the world and is firmly permeating in institutions of higher learning. We are realizing that we can't just evolve disciplines within a discipline. We have to look outside, putting the problem first, and then gathering these sub-disciplines together to form these new islands of discourse. So, to come back to my primary question, however, is motu still the right way of producing knowledge in South Africa in the present day? So, as I explained earlier, this is very important for us to understand. We only refer to motu as an organizing framework for a discourse on knowledge production, not a model or a system for knowledge production. Using the term motu then becomes a convenient placeholder for a rather abstract set of concepts engaged in perpetual interplay. So the term is there for our convenience. So if we still talk about motu and we still write about motu, we are doing it for our convenience. It cannot in and of itself produce knowledge or facilitate knowledge production. So then what about the other modes? Because there's a mode 1 and there's a mode 3 and there's a mode 0, and if you didn't know, there's a mode 0.5, and there will be other modes that come as well. So if mode 2 has been absorbed, what is the need for these other modes? Where do they come from? So mode 1 is also a discursive framework that was observed as a binary opponent when juxtaposed with the observations of mode 2. So that sounds very complicated, but what it simply means is that when they observed this new style, this new trend, this new way of knowledge production, they were putting it into a binary opposition of the existing style, the existing way, and they called that mode 1. So it's important to remember that there was no mode 1, or mode 3, or mode 0 before there was a mode 2. So it started with mode 2, and while the differences between mode 1 and mode 2 accounts for their distinct natures, right, and identities, mode 2 is transdisciplinary because mode 1 is disciplinary. So there's a juxtaposition that is utilized to identify, give character, nature to these two approaches. But the other modes, the subsequent modes that have been identified, like mode 3, draws their distinctiveness largely from the role players in knowledge production and not so much from a juxtaposition to the principles that underline mode 2 and mode 3, mode 1 and mode 2. So stay with me, that sounds very complicated. What it means is we started with mode 2. And mode 2 got its character, its identifier from the fact that it is juxtaposed to the existing way of doing things, which they called mode 1, right? So mode 3 is not a different way or a different approach. What mode 3 is, it involves an interplay and discourse in triple, quadruple, and quintuple helix knowledge production systems. Again, that sounds crazy. All it means is that mode 2 had an identified set of stakeholders in knowledge production, right? When we step further, when we go away from, and I wrote here, when we go from academic and industry, which is where mode 2 plays, and we add to that government, this is where mode 3 comes in. Civil society, further in there. The natural environment, further in there. And we will keep adding to them, right? So the question is not, is motu the correct knowledge system or discourse framework? The question is rather, does motu involve the right role players to adequately facilitate knowledge production in this day and age? I would like to add to this by asking, is our country, our legislation, our socio-economic context, our policies and governance, our relational networks, our collective culture and mindset, are these primed for the triple helix or quadruple helix systems? This is a question that may be riddled out at another day. But I have to ask the question, are we seeing a promotion of partnerships between academics, industry, and government today? Are we? Yes, we are. Right? Yes, we are. Are these relationships matured to the point where they can extend to other stakeholders and sectors? Are these stakeholder relationships adequately supported through policy, funding, incentives, etc.? Are these relationships adverse to operational mismanagement, corruption, and other systemic barriers? No. Can they be? Yes. Right? So what is the verdict on motu then? I have to conclude that we are asking the wrong questions and pushing the wrong agendas. As an organizing framework for a discourse on knowledge production, I truly believe that it has everything we can ask for as a country at this time. But I also believe that we have not optimized the knowledge infrastructure that will allow us to realize the full potential of motu. And motu actually says, make sure you get your relationship between education and industry right first. So I want to leave you with a few statistics to support this. So my verdict on motu being that, is it ideal? Yes. Should we still pursue it? Yes. Have we fully realized it? Can we move on? No. In support of this, I want to point to South Africa's graduate employability conundrum. And did you know that this is a unique phenomenon to South Africa? Other places in the world see a reduction in unemployment as their graduate numbers rise. In South Africa, however, graduate unemployability is rising with the overall unemployment rate. Isn't that bizarre? Graduate unemployability climbed from 5.4% in 1994 to most recently in 2017 to 9%. So we went from 5.4 to 9%. While university enrollment more than doubled from 2000 to present day, the national unemployment rate for graduates still hangs around 27%. Now there are many and greatly varying opinions why this is, but the primary contributing factors are separated into two groups. The first is the supply and demand group, and the second is the employability gap group. Right? Well, the supply of graduate students is certainly there. We are producing students, right, at a rapid rate, at a higher rate than ever in South African history, ready and waiting to address the needs of the country's many skills gaps. Industry is simply not absorbing these candidates. So if you think back to the nature of motu, to first establish that double helix between academia and industry, right? So there's definitely not that happening fully yet. And from a supply and demand gap, the reasons for our cited are as follows. The quantity is emphasized over quality. In other words, we are oversupplying graduates to what the industries can absorb at various levels. So it's an ongoing debate. Are we producing too many doctorates, too little doctorates? Are we focusing too much on science and not enough on mathematics? So there's a misalignment to what we produce and what is absorbed in regard to need. Lack of student support services, poor throughput, questionable admission practices, compromised teaching and learning practices, compromised assessment practices, utilizing underqualified lecturing staff, compromised administrative practices, and impractical class sizes. So these are all the things that are cited as to why we try to account for the supply and demand gap. In regard to the employability gap, and that's the interesting bit that relates to motu, the employability gap, or the divide between what is being taught and what the skills complement of graduates would ideally look like, is often attributed to the following: relevance of tuition, what we teach. Relevance of tuition is the main issue. So this shows you that this relationship, this double helix, this synergy between the world of academia and the world of industry is not fully established in South Africa yet. The efficiency of work-integrated learning programs, the very reason we have work-integrated learning programs is because of motu, because we understand that there has to be a connection between what we teach and what that student will end up doing. But what this is saying is that these programs are not yet fully efficient. A lack of recruitment infrastructure. In other words, we train people, but then we leave them because there's no contractual or relational link between the world of academics and the world of industry. Skills deficiencies, basic skills, intellectual ability, workplace skills, applied knowledge, interactive skills, all of these things are missing, in addition to the quality of secondary education and university admission practices. So, is motu alive and well? Yes. Are the principles applicable? Yes. Should we pursue motu? Absolutely. Are we ready for mode through? Not yet. And I think that's where I want to leave you. I urge you to, as a community of practitioners, as students, as lecturers, as academics at DaVinci, the way that we promote motu is through discourse. There's not a model, there's not a structure, there's not a template. What motu is a set of principles that we talk about, we apply, we test, we reflect on. And that is really what motu is. So even though the world outside doesn't call it that anymore, and even though there are emerging knowledge systems like Mode 3, Mode 2 has become a spirit or a philosophy that is very much at the heart of what DaVinci does. I thank you for your time, your participation, your support.
Industry is quite broad.
Yes.
Within certain segments of it.
Yes.
Would you say it's, have you seen it practically?
Absolutely.
Between all?
No, not all. So that's the point. The point is that, people ask me, why are you talking about Mode 2? There's Mode 3 and there's all these other things that have emerged. That's not the point. The point is that Mode 2 is this discussion. It is this relationship that we're building between these stakeholders. And it starts between the world of academics and industry. Once that is not fully realized, we can't actually move on from there. So has it started? Are there successes? Many successes. Many strong relationships. And I think DaVinci, we have such a close tie to the industries that we serve. They phone us and tell us this is working, this is not working. Think about this, are you dealing with that? And we are able to respond. That's Mode 2 in action. Is that agility to respond, but also to foster long-term relationships that has a sort of a feedback loop. We understand what they need, they understand what our challenges are, and the two to respond, support each other. Yes.
Mario, one of the things that you said which disturbed me immensely right at the end was your observation that the level of graduate unemployment is rising. This to me suggests that there is a serious deficiency in South Africa's education policy.
Absolutely. And what that says is that's proof positive that Mode 2 is not flying yet. Because if it did, then we wouldn't see this. It's dramatic. You hear the stories on the radio. I've got an honors degree in accounting and I can't get a job. And it seems like it's the single incident of people that have bad luck and they're highly qualified. That is not the case. The reality is that it's a growing number of people that suggest that there is definitely a disjointedness between what we produce as institutions of higher learning and what the industry is able to absorb. Yes, to
Mario, there seems to be a disconnect with how traditional universities work and what is in practice.
Yes.
Last year, I registered my daughter for a BA degree at a public university. Then she decided she did not want to do that. So when she applied for a BA degree. But when I had to go and deregister her, I had to go to 4 different departments to deregister them. I had to go to psychology, I had to go to sociology. She wanted also to do 2 languages. So I had to actually go to 4 different departments to deregister. And then also one of the researches that we did, we found that there was a qualification in engineering, but because it had management aspects, it is registered in the regulations in engineering and in some aspects in project management, but the courses are taught in the business school. So there seemed to be a disconnect with how we are regulated and how we apply.
Absolutely. And it comes down to the SESM. So I don't even want to talk about SESM. It's the evilest thing in the world. And it is possibly the most restrictive aspect of a regulatory environment in South Africa in the pursuit of motu. We work in boxes, old boxes that were set up in 1988. We work in boxes. And I had to, in response to a CHE query, I had to write a defense yesterday on how we position our qualification as leadership within business management. And the reality is where else do you put it? Well, overseas, and you and me have done this exercise. If you do comparisons to what DaVinci does to what happens in Europe, you can very easily find an MSc, a Master of Science, in business leadership. They're there. So already the rest of the world are far beyond this. They're far beyond the compartmentalization, the discipline-based motu thinking. We are very much restricted still by what is called the SESM categories. Yes, sir.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity to ask you just one question. One of the conclusions you drew listening to your presentation was that work-integrated programs are not fully efficient in South Africa.
Yes.
My question that I would like to postulate before you
Yes.
is that what would you then recommend in South Africa for something like internships to be made more productive to sustain our ailing economy?
Absolutely. I think it's my comment earlier about curriculum development. This is one of the first things that I learned at DaVinci. Where you would traditionally do, the way that this would traditionally be applied is you've got a module, let's say the module is Principles of Accounting. That module has a set of classical assessments, so there are things that you need to do. You need to be able to work in a ledger, your debtors and creditors, etc. So that is what we assess students on. But when we send them on internships, right, they are still assessed within these limited spectrum of assessments that is based in the discipline. They are not assessed in doing specific workplace tasks that are contextual, not to the discipline, but where the student finds itself. So DaVinci's assessments throw it around, right? You have to identify a problem, a task in your workplace, in your context, that is relevant to you, and that is how we assess you. We are trying as much as possible not to assess you on the theoretical things that you need to have under your belt and anything. So I think that's where the big disjointedness sits. We send people into internships, experiential training programs, but we are still assessing them on book learning. Yes, Martha.
I just want to ask from at doctoral level, we are required to produce new knowledge and research has to be quite formalized academically. How do you see the sort of synergy between solving an industry-based problem and ensuring the research, the methodological orientations and the theoretical foundations of formal research are kept in terms of their integrity? So trying to straddle the two.
Yeah, I don't think there's a... Yeah, Marla asked a difficult question. Yesterday, I was busy working on this response to the CHE in regard to a new program that we're applying for at master's level, and I had to read again what is the difference between an MBL and an MBA, for instance. And I think if it's not a coursework degree, or you're talking about doctoral, but at master's level, that's sort of where the distinction sits. Because there's coursework, there's still a subject that you need to learn.
Yes.
But at doctoral level, that distinction is very little. So DaVinci, with its focus on the management of technology and innovation, unfortunately puts us into a specific subject field, where if we had just a general PhD, for instance, you wouldn't have that compartmentalization to deal with. So I don't fully have an answer for you, but I think it's a discourse, it's a challenge, it's an interplay that we just need to keep refining as we grow as an institution.
Well, I think what's also very important is to keep remembering that to make the link between the probing of the problem, because I've been really thinking about this, the probing of the problem and ensuring that the theoretical foundation, so for those doing PhDs, etc., what you select for your theoretical foundation still has relevance to the problem, but that the solving of the problem itself contributes new knowledge. And it's quite a complex conundrum, and that's why I'm asking.
You know, if we were discipline-based mode 1, and we, let's say, had a PhD that focuses, let's say, on economics, there's a classical canon of literature that we can draw from.
Correct.
As people that promote transdisciplinary research, the doors are wide open. But then you fall into the pitfall of how do you select? So part of what we do actually has to incorporate teaching people how to curate theory and curate information, so that we ensure that we remain structured and not like water.
Yeah, and I think frameworks give you that option as well.
Yes.
But maybe on that question then, and I have a second one after that, is transdisciplinarity. Isn't that maybe then a cognitive ability? And,
Yes.
for people to understand the deeper complexities of what we're dealing with, opposed to what we now call mode 1. First question. Second one is then, if we are lecturing mode 2, should the lecturer not be fully understanding?
Absolutely.
Mode 2 is not a thing, but surely understand what are those aspects that is required.
Absolutely.
How do you teach in mode 2?
The point is that the solution doesn't lie in a discipline.
Agreed.
Yeah. So you need to look at it, be receptive to the fact that you may have been trained in a pure, let's say, finance route, but the problem that's bugging the institution may have contributions from various other issues with HR, engineering, and somebody mentioned. So that's where the transdisciplinary.
And then I have a third question.
Create space. That I think the way we operate, and also Mario was correct that the way we define our qualification, doctorate in management studies or management in, where a PhD gives you more space for that. It means, doctor of philosophy, but it's not philosophy. But it creates opportunity for, when it was conceived, it created opportunities for multidisciplinary studies. But I think it's more transdisciplinary anyway. So in that respect. And the other point you're making is that I think we have to be careful about defining the institution. We should define the philosophy.
Yes.
That's what the philosophy that underpins the way we do things, the way we teach, and the way we engage with people in co-creating knowledge is implementing the principles.
Yes.
You see, and that's the third question then. Isn't TIPS then an epistemology?
So it is a framework. We've debated this quite a lot, Chad, and Ben's unfortunately not here today. But we debated it extensively, and it came out that TIPS as the concept of, or the construct, management of, etc., is actually a framework that has an implementation aspect to it, as well as and implementation can be education implementation. I think the aspects around like ontology and epistemology, whatever, that's what Mario's saying, right in the textbook, because that I definitely think we have to develop further. But as it currently stands, it would definitely be considered a framework and an implementation framework.
Yes, sorry, the last question.
We'll take last question.
Sorry, so I just wanted to understand is that I think maybe is the opportunity for us as an institution, not that we can bridge the gap through sharing more of our knowledge, the case study successes, and those stories, because I think as much as, if one can research anything on the internet, but not find mode 2, or at least evidence that this transdisciplinary process is a success, that one would then be able to create more case studies of that. But if we did consider having everyone in the room contribute to this,
absolutely,
and almost raise it, whereas maybe these things sit too much in isolation and not as
absolutely.
available.
Yeah, I think can I contribute there as well is that
I think in the South African context, the DaVinci Institute has brought this to the fore. Right? But I can tell you, being an examiner for PhDs in the country and abroad as well, it is there. Most recently, I examined one for UNISA, and I could see those transdisciplinary principles integrated in that study. Because someone in management studies is doing something on gender and what do you call it, people's lifestyle. It's an ethnographic study, but it was about anthropology, and bringing those principles, how it fit into aspects of leadership. So I could see it. I think they don't shout about it. I think they're the only institution that shout about it. And because other institutions are allowing for this, you see, end of the day is that, do we have suitable supervisors, research supervisors, to understand that? That's where students may be coming up with those beautiful topics, but the institutions are not accepting them on board, saying we don't have a supervisor. You know, that's the challenge we face.
But I definitely agree with you in terms of the showcasing aspect, because Prof. Krishna and I have discussed quite a bit. It's very important that people can see the value in the output of the research. Because in seeing that, you can then show that it has a strong theoretical foundation, a good methodological orientation, and it's got the application base. So we are making inroads with regards to that. One of the ways in which we do it is obviously through the publication of our research report, which looks at those candidates that have completed their doctorates from the year before. But we're taking a step up this year and we're moving towards more conference presentations in this regard, looking at DaVinci conference towards the end of contributing to the Triple Helix conference. But I think a very important aspect of that is definitely going to be what you refer to as the case study research. That from undergraduate level, it has fascinated me since joining DaVinci how much research has been done at an undergraduate level that shows such a robust approach to research that you don't see in classical BComs. So what we need to be doing is, and Prof. Krishna and I are looking at ways that we could showcase those case studies in a manner that shows the gravitas of the research. So I think that is definitely the way we need to be going. Yes.
All right, I think we need to brag about what we do. We haven't been doing that. That's the whole idea, is that great work is being done, but are we sharing that? So as Amala rightly said, that this is one of the strategic objectives that she's will be initiating and driving, that give it more. And we need to play in the fields where our peers are, because we have the challenge that peers don't understand what we do. You see? So that is why if you don't understand something, it is not good. So anyway, I think, Mari, thank you very much. You've given us much.